The first time Ethan Kerrigan saw the orc girl eat her meal standing beside the barn wall, he thought perhaps she was in a hurry. The second time, he assumed she preferred the fresh air. But by the fifth evening, watching her wolf down stew with her back pressed against the rough wood, while everyone else sat at the long table, he knew something was wrong. She had arrived at the frontier settlement 3 weeks ago with a merchant caravan, purchased like livestock according to the whispers that spread through the small farming community. Marcus Webb, the man who bought her, claimed he needed help with his expanding wheat fields. Ethan had seen the chains when she first arrived, the way she kept her eyes down, the careful way she moved as if expecting a blow at any moment. Now those chains were gone, but she still ate like an animal expecting to be kicked away from its food. Ethan lived on the neighboring farm, a modest plot of land he had worked for 6 years since leaving the military. At 32, he had seen enough of war and death to appreciate the simple rhythm of planting and harvest. His land bordered Marcus Webb's property, and lately Marcus had been hiring him for extra work during the busy season. That was how Ethan found himself eating evening meals at Webb's farm, watching the orc girl stand in the shadows while the other workers sat and joked and passed bread around the table. She was young, probably no more than 20, with the characteristic green skin of her people and small tusks that protruded just slightly over her lower lip. Her black hair was kept in a practical braid that fell past her shoulders, and her build was strong from years of hard labor. She wore simple clothes, a worn tunic and trousers that had seen better days, and she moved with an efficiency that spoke of someone who had learned to make herself useful to survive. On the evening Ethan finally asked, she was eating some kind of grain porridge from a wooden bowl, standing near the barn door with her shoulders hunched slightly forward. The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Most of the other workers had already finished eating and wandered off to the bunkhouse or to smoke their pipes before bed. Ethan carried his own bowl over to where she stood. She noticed him approaching and immediately tensed, her green eyes flicking to him and then away. Up close, he could see the small scars that marked her arms and the wariness that lived permanently in her expression. "Mind if I stand here?" he asked, keeping his voice casual. She shook her head quickly, a small jerky motion. She took another bite of her porridge, her eyes fixed on the ground. "I've noticed you always eat standing up," Ethan said after a moment. He tried to sound friendly, curious rather than accusatory. "Is there a reason for that?" The orc girl froze mid-bite. For a long moment she did not move, and Ethan wondered if he had overstepped some boundary he did not understand. Then slowly, very slowly, she lowered her bowl and turned to look at him directly for the first time since he had approached. Her eyes were a striking amber color, bright against her green skin. There was pain in them, old and deep, but also a kind of fierce pride that had not been completely beaten out of her. "Slaves do not sit," she said quietly. Her voice was rough, as if she did not use it often. "Where I come from, slaves eat standing. Sitting is for people." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He had known she had been enslaved, everyone knew that, but hearing her say it so plainly, with such matter-of-fact resignation, made it real in a way the rumors had not. "You're not a slave anymore," he said carefully. "Marcus pays you, doesn't he?" Her laugh was bitter and short. "Marcus Webb gives me food and a place to sleep in the barn. That is payment enough, he says. I should be grateful I am not in chains." Ethan felt anger rising in his chest, hot and sharp. He had heard Marcus was cheap, that he worked his people hard for little reward, but this was something else entirely. This was exploitation dressed up as charity. "What's your name?" he asked instead of voicing his anger. Getting angry would not help her and might make things worse. She hesitated, as if even that small piece of information was something precious she had to guard carefully. "Rasha," she finally said. "My name is Rasha. I'm Ethan Kerrigan. I work the farm that borders this one to the east." Rasha nodded slightly. "I know. I have seen you in the fields." They stood in silence for a few moments. Ethan could hear the evening insects beginning their songs and the distant lowing of cattle settling in for the night. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would ease the pain he had seen in her eyes, but he could not find the right words. "Tomorrow, if you eat dinner here again, sit at the table," he finally said. "Nobody has the right to make you stand like that, not anymore." Rasha's expression shuddered closed, becoming carefully neutral. "You do not understand how things work." "Maybe not," Ethan admitted, "but I know what's right and what isn't, and making someone eat like they're not worthy of a chair isn't right." He left before she could respond, carrying his empty bowl back to the washing station. But he felt her eyes on him as he walked away, and he hoped he had planted a seed of something, even if he was not sure what. The next evening, Rasha ate standing up again. Ethan said nothing, but he made sure to catch her eye across the yard and shake his head slightly. She looked away quickly, but he thought he saw the tiniest flicker of something in her expression. Amusement, maybe, or appreciation that someone had noticed. It became a pattern. Every evening when Ethan came to work at Webb's farm, he would look for Rasha. Sometimes she was in the fields, her strong back bent over the wheat as she harvested with a speed that put the human workers to shame. Sometimes she was hauling water or repairing fences or mucking out the barn. She did the work of 3 people, Ethan noticed, and she did it without complaint. And every evening she ate standing up. Ethan started bringing extra food from his own farm. Fresh vegetables from his garden, eggs from his chickens, occasionally a piece of smoked meat. He would leave these things near where Rasha worked, casually, as if he had simply forgotten them there. The first few times she looked at the offerings with deep suspicion, but hunger eventually won out. The food always disappeared. They did not speak much at first. Rasha seemed to have built walls around herself, and Ethan understood that breaking through them would take time. He had seen soldiers with that same wariness, men who had endured too much and trusted too little. Pushing too hard would only make her retreat further. But slowly, gradually, she began to acknowledge him. A nod when he arrived in the morning, a quiet word of thanks when he left food where she could find it. Once, when he was struggling to lift a heavy beam that had fallen across a path, she appeared beside him without a word and helped him move it. Her strength was impressive, and Ethan told her so. She ducked her head, but he thought he saw a small smile. 3 months passed. Summer faded into autumn, and the work on Webb's farm grew more intense as harvest season reached its peak. Ethan found himself spending more and more time there, and that meant more opportunities to observe Rasha and the way she was treated. It was not just that she ate standing. She slept in the barn while the human workers had beds in the bunkhouse. She was given the hardest jobs, the ones that required the most strength and endurance. When tools broke or work went wrong, Marcus Webb blamed her first and loudest. The other workers treated her with a mixture of fear and contempt, as if her presence contaminated them somehow. Ethan began to speak up. When Marcus criticized Rasha unfairly, Ethan pointed out the facts. When other workers made cruel jokes, Ethan did not laugh. It made him unpopular, he knew, but he had never been particularly concerned with being liked. He had principles, and one of them was that people deserved to be treated with basic dignity regardless of what species they were born as. One cold evening in late October, Ethan found Rasha sitting on the ground behind the barn, cradling her hand against her chest. The sun had just set and the temperature was dropping fast. He could see her breath misting in the air. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Nothing," she said quickly. "I am fine." But he could see blood seeping between her fingers. "Let me see." She resisted for a moment, then reluctantly opened her hand. There was a deep gash across her palm, still bleeding freely. "The scythe slipped," she said. "It is not bad. It needs to be cleaned and wrapped," Ethan said firmly. "Come on, I have supplies back at my place." "I cannot leave," Rasha said. "Mr. Webb will be angry if I am not here to help with the evening chores." "Mr. Webb can manage one evening," Ethan said. His voice was harder than he intended. "You're hurt. Come with me." Rasha looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the internal struggle playing out behind her eyes. Finally, she nodded and stood up. "Just to wrap the hand," she said. "Then I come back." Ethan's farm was a 15-minute walk through the fields. The evening air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of dry grass and wood smoke from distant hearths. Rasha walked slightly behind him, quiet as a shadow, her injured hand still pressed against her chest. His house was small but well-maintained, a single-story structure with a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over his land. Inside it was warm and lived in, with simple furniture he had built himself, and books stacked on a shelf near the fire. Rasha paused in the doorway, looking around with obvious surprise. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Just me," Ethan confirmed. He gestured to a chair near the fireplace. "Sit down, I will get water and bandages." He saw her hesitate, saw the old training reassert itself. She moved toward the chair but did not sit, instead standing beside it with her good hand resting on the back. Ethan brought a basin of clean water and strips of cloth. He also had a bottle of clear alcohol he used for disinfecting wounds, a habit from his military days. He set everything on the small table and then looked at Rasha pointedly. "Sit," he said gently. "Please." "I cannot," she whispered. "It is not right." "What's not right is you standing there bleeding when there is a perfectly good chair you could be using." Ethan pulled out the chair slightly. "Rasha, you are in my house now. My rules. And in my house, guests sit down." She stared at the chair as if it were a trap that might spring closed on her. Her breathing had quickened slightly, and Ethan realized this was not just habit for her. This was something deeper, something that had been drilled into her through pain and repetition until it became part of her identity. "I will sit first," he said, pulling over another chair and settling into it. "See, I am sitting. Now you sit too, we will sit together." It took almost a full minute, but finally Rasha lowered herself into the chair. She sat on the very edge, her posture rigid, looking like she might bolt at any second, but she was sitting. "There," Ethan said quietly. "That was not so terrible, was it?" Rasha did not answer. Her eyes were fixed on her injured hand, and he could see her blinking rapidly as if fighting back tears. Ethan cleaned the wound carefully, washing away the blood and dirt. The cut was deep but clean, and he did not think it would become infected if properly treated. Rasha barely flinched when he poured alcohol over it, though it must have hurt terribly. She had learned to swallow pain, he realized. She had learned not to show weakness. As he wrapped the bandage around her palm, he spoke quietly. "How long were you enslaved?" 10 years, she said. Her voice was barely audible. "Since I was 11. She had been a child." Ethan felt sick thinking about it. "How did it happen?" "Raiders attacked my clan's territory. We were not a large clan, mostly farmers and herders. We could not defend ourselves properly. The raiders killed many people and took the survivors to sell in the southern markets." She paused, staring into the fire. "I do not remember much about my life before. Sometimes I try, but it is like trying to see through thick fog. Where was your clan's territory?" "North." in the foothills near the Gray Vein Mountains. It was beautiful there, cold in winter but beautiful. There were pine forests and clear streams. My mother kept goats. Rasha's voice had taken on a distant quality, as if she was speaking from very far away. That is one thing I do remember. The sound of the goat bells. Ethan finished tying off the bandage and sat back. I'm sorry that happened to you. Why? Rasha looked at him directly, and her amber eyes were fierce now. You did not do it. You are not responsible for the cruelty of others. No, but I'm sorry anyway. Nobody deserves what you went through, especially not a child. They sat in silence for a while. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, Ethan could hear the wind picking up, rustling through the last leaves still clinging to the trees. Why do you help me? Rasha finally asked. The food, the kindness, now this. Why? It was a fair question, and Ethan tried to give her an honest answer. Because it is the right thing to do. Because I have seen too much suffering in my life to ignore it when it is right in front of me. And because you deserve better than how you are being treated. I am an orc, she said flatly. Most humans think we are animals, monsters. Most humans are idiots, Ethan replied. That startled a laugh out of her, short and surprised. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. You are strange, Ethan Kerrigan, she said, but there was warmth in her voice now. I have been called worse. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face. With her guard down, she looked younger, more like the girl she might have been if life had been kinder to her. They talked for another hour. Ethan learned that Rasha could read a little, taught by a kind slave master she had briefly served when she was 14. He learned that she loved rain and hated the color yellow for no reason she could explain. He learned that she had never tasted fresh fruit before arriving at Webb's farm, that everything she had eaten for 10 years had been gruel or stale bread or whatever scraps she could scavenge. In return, he told her about his time in the military, about the friends he had lost, and the reasons he had left to become a farmer. He told her about his dream of expanding his land, maybe getting some sheep or goats of his own. He did not tell her that since meeting her, he had started imagining what it might be like to have someone to share that dream with. When Rasha finally stood to leave, she swayed slightly. Ethan realized she was exhausted, that she had been working from dawn until now with only that brief break to eat her standing meal. Stay, he said impulsively. It is late and cold. You can sleep here tonight. I have a spare room. Rasha shook her head immediately. I cannot. Mr. Webb will expect me to be there in the morning. You will be there in the morning. I will wake you before dawn and we will walk back together. He could see her wavering. Rasha, when was the last time you slept in an actual bed? I do not remember, she admitted quietly. Then stay. Please. One night in a warm house with a real bed. You have earned at least that much. She looked at him searchingly, as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of trick. Finally, she nodded. One night. The spare room was small but comfortable, with a real bed frame and a thick quilt. Ethan lit a lamp and showed Rasha where everything was. She stood in the middle of the room looking overwhelmed, her bandaged hand held carefully against her chest. There is more blankets in that chest if you get cold, Ethan said. And if you need anything during the night, I am right across the hall. Thank you, Rasha whispered, for everything. Ethan left her there and went to his own room, but he found it hard to sleep. He kept thinking about Rasha, about the 10 years she had lost, about the way she had looked at that chair as if it represented something impossible. He had known people were cruel to orcs, but knowing it intellectually and seeing the results firsthand were very different things. When he finally slept, his dreams were troubled. He woke before dawn as promised and found Rasha already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed fully dressed with her boots on. She looked rested, though, more than he had ever seen her, and that made him glad. They walked back to Webb's farm in the pre-dawn darkness. The world was quiet except for their footsteps and the occasional call of an early bird. As they approached the farm buildings, Rasha stopped. "Last night," she said hesitantly. "That was the first time in 10 years I slept without being afraid, the first time I felt safe." She looked at him, and her eyes were bright. "I will not forget that, no matter what happens." Before Ethan could respond, she had turned and hurried toward the barn, disappearing into the shadows. He watched her go, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. The next few weeks were difficult. Marcus Webb found out that Rasha had been away from the farm and confronted Ethan about it. Their argument was loud and public, with Webb accusing Ethan of trying to steal his property, and Ethan pointing out that people were not property, and Webb was lucky. Ethan did not report him to the territorial magistrate for his treatment of Rasha. The argument ended their working relationship. Ethan was no longer welcome on Webb's farm, which meant he no longer had any excuse to see Rasha regularly. He tried not to think about her alone there, tried to focus on his own harvest and his own work, but he found his thoughts returning to her constantly. He saw her occasionally in the distance, working in the fields. She never looked his way, but he wondered if she knew he was watching. He wondered if she thought about him the way he thought about her. November arrived with the first real cold snap. Ethan had just finished dinner one evening when he heard a quiet knock at his door. He opened it to find Rasha standing there, shivering in the darkness. Her clothes were inadequate for the weather, and she looked like she had been crying. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. "Of course." Ethan stepped aside quickly, ushering her into the warmth. "What happened?" Rasha stood near the fire, rubbing her arms. The bandage was gone from her hand, replaced by a thin, pink scar. "Mr. Webb sold his farm," she said. "A man from the Eastern Territories bought it. He arrives next week to take possession." "That is good news, is it not? Maybe the new owner will treat you better." "The new owner does not want me. Mr. Webb is taking me with him when he leaves. He is moving to the border settlements, and he says an orc worker is valuable there. The labor is hard and dangerous, and orcs are cheap." Ethan felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. The border settlements were rough places, full of violence and exploitation. Rasha would not survive there, not for long. Even if she did, the cost would be everything that made her who she was. "When do you leave?" he asked. 3 days. I came to say goodbye." Rasha looked at him, and the expression on her face broke his heart. "I wanted to thank you for your kindness, for treating me like a person. I will carry that memory with me wherever I go." "No," Ethan said firmly. "Absolutely not. You are not going to the border settlements with that man." "I have no choice," Rasha said. "I have nowhere else to go, no money, no one who would take me in. This is how it is for people like me." Ethan's mind was racing. There had to be a solution, something he was not seeing. Then it hit him, so obvious he wondered why he had not thought of it immediately. "Stay here," he said. "Work for me. I will pay you real wages, and you can live here in the spare room. I need help with the farm anyway, and you are the best worker I have ever seen." Rasha stared at him. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious. I have been thinking about hiring help for months now. The farm is getting too large for me to manage alone." "Ethan, people will talk. A human man and an orc woman living in the same house. They will assume terrible things. Let them assume whatever they want. I do not care what narrow-minded fools think." He stepped closer to her. "Rasha, you saved my life with that beam, remember? You did not have to help me, but you did. Let me return the favor. Stay here. Be safe." "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I am nothing. Nobody." You are not nothing, Ethan said fiercely. You are brave and strong and kind despite everything that has been done to you. You deserve a chance at a real life. Let me give you that chance. Tears were streaming down Rasha's green cheeks now. I do not understand you. I do not understand why you would risk your reputation, your standing in the community for someone like me. Because I am falling in love with you, Ethan thought, but did not say. It was too soon, too complicated. She needed safety and security, not a confession that might make her feel obligated or uncomfortable. Because it is the right thing to do, he said instead. And because I think you and I could be good friends if given the chance. Stay, Rasha, please. She closed her eyes and he could see the war happening inside her. Fear against hope, old trauma against new possibility. Finally, she opened her eyes and nodded. I will stay, she whispered, but I will earn my keep. I will work harder than anyone you could have hired. I will prove that your faith in me is not misplaced. I have no doubt, Ethan said, smiling. Now, have you eaten? She shook her head. He went to the kitchen and put together a simple meal of bread, cheese, and leftover stew. When he brought it to the table and set it down, Rasha moved to stand beside the wall. Sit, Ethan said gently. I do not know if I can, she admitted. Even after that night it is so hard. My body remembers even when my mind knows it is allowed. Then we will practice, Ethan said. He sat down at the table and patted the chair next to him. Every night we will eat dinner together, and every night you will sit. Eventually it will become natural again. You will remember what it feels like to be treated as an equal. Rasha approached the table slowly. She put her hand on the back of the chair and took several deep breaths. Then, moving as if every inch was a battle, she lowered herself into the seat. Good, Ethan said quietly. That is very good, Rasha. They ate together in comfortable silence. Ethan noticed that Rasha kept glancing at him, as if checking to make sure he was still there, that this was real and not some dream she would wake from. After dinner, they discussed the practical arrangements. Ethan had to go speak with Marcus Webb the next morning to negotiate Rasha's employment contract and make it official. Webb would want money, Ethan knew. The man saw everything in terms of profit and loss, but Ethan had savings, and he was prepared to pay whatever it took. That night, Rasha slept in the spare room again. Ethan lay awake in his own bed, thinking about how his life had just changed in ways he could not fully predict. He was taking a risk, he knew. The community would not be kind about his decision. But every time he thought about Rasha's face when she talked about the border settlements, every time he remembered her saying she felt safe in his house, he knew he was making the right choice. The next morning, Ethan went to see Marcus Webb. The negotiation was unpleasant but ultimately successful. Webb wanted twice what Rasha was worth, and Ethan paid it without argument. They drew up a contract transferring Rasha's employment, and Webb signed with obvious satisfaction at having gotten such a good price. You are making a mistake, Webb told Ethan as he pocketed the money. Orcs are not like us. You treat them well and they just take advantage. Mark my words that one will rob you blind first chance she gets. Then I suppose I will learn an expensive lesson, Ethan said coldly. Good day, Webb. He returned home to find Rasha working in his garden, pulling up the last of the season's root vegetables. She straightened when she saw him approaching, her expression anxious. It is done, Ethan said, holding up the contract. You work for me now, officially and legally. Rasha's knees buckled slightly. She sat down hard on the cold ground, her hand covering her mouth. I thought perhaps you would change your mind, that you would realize it was foolish and decide not to go through with it. I do not change my mind once it is made up, Ethan said. He held out his hand to help her up. Come on. Let me show you around the farm properly. If you are going to work here, you should know where everything is. They spent the morning touring the property. Ethan's farm was modest compared to Webb's, but it was well organized and productive. He had 2 fields for rotating crops, a large garden, a chicken coop, and a small barn that currently held only his horse and some storage. There was a stream that ran along the eastern boundary, providing fresh water year-round. "I have been thinking about getting goats," Ethan said as they stood near the barn. "You said your mother kept goats. Do you remember anything about caring for them?" Rasha's face lit up. "Yes. Yes, I remember. They need good shelter and fresh water. They are clever creatures, always getting into trouble, but their milk is sweet, and their wool is warm." "Then maybe in the spring we will get some goats," Ethan said. Seeing her excitement made him happy in a way he had not expected. Over the following days and weeks, they fell into a routine. Rasha threw herself into the work with an intensity that sometimes worried Ethan. She was up before dawn and worked until well after dark, taking on every task with fierce determination. She repaired sections of fence that Ethan had been putting off for months. She reorganized the barn, making everything more efficient. She worked in the fields, preparing the soil for winter and ensuring everything was properly secured against the coming cold. And every evening, they ate dinner together. Every evening, Ethan set 2 places at the table. And every evening, it got a little bit easier for Rasha to sit down. They talked during those dinners, really talked. Ethan learned more about orc culture, about the clan system, and the traditions that governed their society. He learned that orcs valued honor and strength, but not in the brutal way humans imagined. For orcs, true strength included compassion, community responsibility, and the courage to protect those weaker than yourself. Rasha learned about human customs in return. She asked endless questions about things Ethan took for granted. Why humans cooked their food in so many different ways. Why they built houses from wood instead of stone. Why they celebrated certain holidays and observed certain traditions. Her curiosity was endearing, and Ethan found himself seeing his own culture through fresh eyes as he tried to explain things he had never really thought about. Winter arrived properly in December, bringing snow and freezing temperatures. The work on the farm slowed to winter maintenance, which meant more time spent indoors. Ethan taught Rasha to read better, spending evenings by the fire working through the books on his shelf. She was a quick learner, hungry for knowledge in the same way she had been hungry for food when he first met her. One evening near Christmas, they were reading together when Rasha suddenly closed her book and looked at Ethan seriously. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I have been keeping it to myself, but it is not fair to you." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What is it?" "My hand, the one that was cut. It healed so quickly because of something orcs can do. We heal faster than humans, especially if we focus our intention on it, but there is a cost. The rapid healing makes us very hungry, and if we do not eat enough, it weakens us for days afterward." Ethan waited, not sure where this was going. "That night you brought me here and bandaged my hand. I was so hungry I could barely think, but I did not tell you because I was ashamed. I did not want you to know that I had been taking food from Mr. Webb's stores without permission for years. Small amounts, things he would not notice, but still theft." Her voice was shaking now. "You need to know that about me. I am a thief. I have stolen to survive." "Rasha," Ethan said gently. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to his. "You did what you had to do to stay alive. That is not something to be ashamed of. Webb did not feed you properly, did not pay you, treated you like property. If you took food, you were just claiming what should have been yours all along. You do not think less of me. I think you are one of the strongest people I have ever met, and I am glad you told me about the healing. From now on, if you are hurt, tell me immediately so I can make sure you eat enough." "All right," she nodded, blinking back tears. You are a good man, Ethan Kerrigan. Better than I thought humans could be. Christmas came and went quietly. Ethan made a special meal and gave Rasha a present, a new set of work clothes he had commissioned from the seamstress in the nearest village. Rasha looked at the clothes with wonder, running her fingers over the sturdy fabric. I've never had new clothes before, she said softly. Everything I have ever worn has belonged to someone else first. This is too much. It is exactly enough, Ethan said. You work hard. You deserve to have things that are your own. She hugged him then, sudden and fierce. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, feeling the strength in her frame and the way she was trembling slightly. They stood like that for a long moment, and when they finally pulled apart, there was something different in the air between them. Something new and fragile and terrifying. January brought a crisis. A winter storm struck hard, dumping 3 feet of snow in 2 days, and driving the temperature so low that even staying near the fire did not chase away the chill. On the second night of the storm, Ethan woke to a crashing sound and the smell of smoke. He ran from his bedroom to find that the chimney had partially collapsed, sending bricks and smoke into the main room. The fire was spreading to the wooden floor, licking up the curtains near the window. Rasha was already there, beating at the flames with a blanket. Get water, she shouted. The pump outside. Ethan grabbed every bucket he could find and ran outside into the howling storm. The cold hit him like a physical wall, stealing his breath. The pump handle was frozen, and it took precious seconds to get it working. He filled buckets and ran them back inside, where Rasha was fighting the fire with methodical determination. Together, they managed to put out the flames before they spread to the walls, but the damage was severe. Half the main room was charred and smoking, the chimney was destroyed, and cold air was pouring in through gaps in the damaged structure. We cannot stay here tonight, Ethan said, coughing from the smoke. It is too dangerous. The rest of the chimney could collapse, and without it we cannot keep the house warm enough. The barn, Rasha said immediately. We can shelter there. There is hay for insulation and we can bring blankets. They worked quickly, gathering what they needed and making their way to the barn through the storm. The structure was solid, built to withstand harsh weather. Ethan's horse, a gentle mare named Cricket, nickered nervously at the smoke smell on their clothes but calmed when Rasha spoke to her in a low, soothing voice. They created a nest in one of the empty stalls, piling hay for insulation and spreading out every blanket they had brought. The storm raged outside, but inside the barn it was relatively quiet and safe. I am sorry, Rasha said as they huddled in their makeshift shelter. If I had noticed the chimney problem earlier, I could have fixed it before this happened. This is not your fault, Ethan said firmly. The chimney was old. I should have had it inspected last spring. If anything, I am the one who should apologize. You could have been killed. But I was not, and neither were you. That is what matters. They sat close together, sharing warmth. The cold was intense, seeping through the walls and finding every gap in their defenses. Ethan could feel Rasha shivering despite the blankets. Come here, he said, opening his arms. We need to share body heat or we are both going to freeze. Rasha hesitated only a moment before moving closer. Ethan wrapped his arms around her and pulled her against his chest, tucking the blankets around them both. She was cold, but her presence was solid and reassuring. Thank you for acting so quickly, Ethan murmured into her hair. You probably saved both our lives. I told you I would earn my keep, Rasha said, but he could hear the smile in her voice. They talked quietly through the long night, sharing stories to stay awake and alert. Rasha told him about the pine forests of her childhood, about tracking deer with her father and learning to identify plants with her mother. Ethan told her about his time in the military, about the friends he had made and lost, about the day he decided he had seen enough death and walked away. "Do you ever regret leaving?" Rasha asked. "No, that life was not for me. Too much destruction, not enough creation. Here I plant things and watch them grow. I take care of animals. I build instead of destroying. That is what I need. I understand that. When I work in the fields, when I see things growing because of my labor, it makes me feel whole in a way nothing else does, like I am part of something larger than myself." "Exactly," Ethan said. "You understand completely." As the night wore on and exhaustion crept in, Rasha relaxed against him. Her head rested on his shoulder, her breathing slow and even. Ethan let himself hold her, let himself imagine that this was not just about survival, that they chose to be this close because they wanted to be. He was in love with her. He had been for months, probably since that first night when she sat at his table and looked like she had been given the world. He loved her strength and her courage. He loved the way she approached every task with complete focus. He loved her rare smile and her fierce pride and the vulnerability she showed only to him. But he could not tell her. Not yet. She was still healing from 10 years of trauma, still learning how to be free. The last thing she needed was pressure from him, expectations she might feel obligated to meet out of gratitude. So he held her through the cold night and kept his feelings locked carefully away. The storm broke near dawn. They emerged from the barn exhausted and stiff, but alive. The house looked worse in daylight, the damage even more extensive than Ethan had realized. It would take weeks to repair properly, and in the meantime, they would need somewhere else to stay. The nearest neighbor was Mrs. Talbot, a widow who lived on a small farm about 2 miles away. Ethan had helped her with repairs several times over the years, and she was one of the few people in the community who treated everyone with basic decency regardless of their species. They made their way to her farm through the snow. Mrs. Talbot took one look at their soot-stained clothes and tired faces and immediately ushered them inside. "Merciful heavens," she said. "What happened?" Ethan explained while Mrs. Talbot bustled around making hot tea and finding them clean clothes. She was a small woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a kind heart. When she heard the full story, she shook her head. "That old chimney has been a disaster waiting to happen for years. I told you to get it replaced, Ethan Kerrigan, but would you listen? You are as stubborn as your father was." She turned to Rasha. "And you, young lady, are a hero, quick thinking, putting those flames out." Rasha looked startled at being praised. "I only did what needed to be done." "That is the very definition of a hero," Mrs. Talbot said firmly. "Now, the two of you will stay here until Ethan's house is repaired. I have plenty of room and I will not take no for an answer." They stayed with Mrs. Talbot for 3 weeks. During that time, Ethan worked on repairing his house with help from a builder in the village. The work was slow and expensive, but necessary. Meanwhile, Rasha helped Mrs. Talbot with her farm and household chores, and the older woman became quite fond of her. "That girl is a treasure," Mrs. Talbot told Ethan one evening when Rasha was outside feeding the chickens. "Hardest worker I have ever seen, and sweet as honey once she trusts you. You had better treat her right, young man." "I do my best," Ethan said. "Your best had better include making an honest woman of her," Mrs. Talbot said bluntly. "I have eyes, Ethan. I see how you look at her. And I see how she looks at you when she thinks nobody is watching. If you feel that way about each other, you should do something about it." "It is complicated," Ethan said. "She has been through so much. I do not want to pressure her or make her feel like she owes me anything." "Pa, that girl does not do anything out of obligation. If she cares for you, it is because she chooses to, not because she feels forced." Mrs. Talbot poured more tea. Life is short, Ethan. When you find something real, something worth having, you should not let fear stop you from reaching for it." Her words stayed with him. That night, lying in Mrs. Talbot's guest room, Ethan thought about what it would mean to tell Rasha how he felt. The risk of ruining what they had built. The possibility that she might not feel the same way. But also the possibility that she might, and that they could have something more than just friendship and shared work. He was still thinking about it when they moved back to his repaired house in February. The new chimney was solid and safe, the damaged portions of the house rebuilt and reinforced. It felt good to be home, but also strange. The house felt different now, like it was waiting for something. They fell back into their routine, but something had shifted between them. Ethan noticed Rasha watching him sometimes with an expression he could not quite read. She had stopped sleeping in the spare room, he realized. She had started to really live there, adding small personal touches. A bundle of dried herbs she had gathered. A smooth stone from the stream that she liked. A drawing she had done of the mountains in the distance. One evening in early March, they were cleaning up after dinner when Rasha suddenly spoke. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Anything." "Why have you never married? You are a good man, a hard worker, you have your own land. Many women would be happy to be your wife." The question caught him off guard. "I suppose I never found the right person," he said carefully. "I wanted someone who saw the world the way I do, someone who valued the same things, partnership, not just convenience. And have you ever come close to finding that person?" He looked at her, at the way the lamplight caught in her amber eyes, at the tension in her shoulders that suggested this question mattered more than her casual tone implied. "Yes," he said quietly, "I have come close." "What stopped you from pursuing it?" "Fear, mostly. Fear of rejection. Fear of destroying something good by wanting more than was offered." Rasha set down the dish she was drying. What if the other person felt the same way? What if they were also afraid? Ethan's heart was pounding now. "Then I suppose we would both be fools, wasting time that could be spent being happy together." "Yes," Rasha said, "I suppose we would be." They stood on opposite sides of the small kitchen, looking at each other. Ethan could see Rasha's hands trembling slightly, could see the courage it was taking for her to have this conversation. "Rasha," he began, but she held up a hand. "Let me speak first. Please, I need to say this." She took a deep breath. "When I first came to live here, I thought I was broken. 10 years of being told I was worthless, that I was property, that I did not deserve basic dignity. I believed it. It was easier to believe it than to fight it every day." "You are not broken," Ethan said, but she continued as if he had not spoken. "But you treated me differently. You saw me as a person. You gave me a place at your table. You taught me to read better. You trusted me with important work. And slowly, piece by piece, you helped me remember who I was before. Not completely, not all the way, but enough. Enough that I could start to imagine a future instead of just surviving day to day." Tears were streaming down her green cheeks now. "And somewhere in all of that, I fell in love with you. I did not mean to. I know it is complicated and probably foolish, but it happened anyway. And I need you to know, even if you do not feel the same way. I need you to know that you changed my life, and I will always be grateful for that." Ethan crossed the kitchen in 3 long steps and pulled her into his arms. "You foolish, wonderful woman," he said against her hair. "I love you too. I have loved you for months. I was just too afraid to say it." Rasha pulled back enough to look up at him, her expression stunned. "Truly, you love me, truly, completely, absolutely." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "You are the strongest, bravest person I have ever known. You make me want to be better. And yes, before you ask, I mean all of that. I am not saying it because I think I should. I am saying it because it is true." "But I am an orc," she whispered. People will hate us for being together. They will make our lives difficult. Let them try. I have faced worse than small-minded bigots. We will deal with whatever comes together. You are sure, truly sure?" Instead of answering with words, Ethan kissed her. It was soft and careful, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wanted to. But she did not pull away. She kissed him back with a hunger that spoke of months of restrained longing, her arms wrapping around his neck and pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rasha was smiling. It was the most beautiful thing Ethan had ever seen. "I have wanted to do that for so long," she admitted. "But I was afraid you would reject me, afraid it would ruin what we had." "We have both been fools," Ethan said and kissed her again. They talked late into the night, lying together on the rug in front of the fire. They talked about their feelings, about when they had first started to develop, about the future they might have together. Rasha admitted that she had started to love him when he first asked her why she ate standing up, that his simple recognition of her humanity had cracked something open inside her. Ethan told her about watching her work, about being amazed by her strength and determination, about the moment he had realized she was not just someone he wanted to protect, but someone he wanted to spend his life with. "What do we do now?" Rasha asked, her head resting on his chest. "Now we live," Ethan said simply. "We work the farm together, we build a life together, and eventually, if you want, we get married." Rasha went very still. "You want to marry me? Eventually, yes. When you are ready, there is no rush, but yes, I want you to be my wife if you will have me." "I will," she said immediately, then laughed. "Is that too fast? Am I supposed to pretend to think about it?" "Never pretend with me," Ethan said, laughing too. "If you mean it, then yes is a perfect answer." They spent that night together, not in a physical sense but in a deeper one. They slept curled up together on the rug, unwilling to let go of each other even for the comfort of a proper bed. And when Ethan woke in the morning to find Rasha still in his arms, her face peaceful in sleep, he knew with absolute certainty that this was what he wanted for the rest of his life. The news of their relationship spread through the community quickly. The reactions were mixed. Mrs. Talbot was delighted and immediately began planning an engagement party. Some of their neighbors were cautiously accepting, willing to give Ethan the benefit of the doubt even if they did not fully understand his choice. But others were hostile, viewing the relationship as unnatural or disgusting. The worst was Samuel Drake, a farmer who lived a few miles south. Drake was known for his hatred of orcs, claiming that one had killed his brother years ago during a border raid. When he heard about Ethan and Rasha, he made his displeasure known loudly and publicly. "It is an abomination," Drake said in the village one day when Ethan had come to buy supplies. "A human and an orc, it goes against nature." "What goes against nature is your ignorance," Ethan replied calmly. "But I have no interest in changing your mind, Drake. Think whatever you want, just stay away from me and mine. Or what? You will sick your orc pet on me." Ethan's hands clenched into fists, but before he could respond, Rasha put a hand on his arm. She had accompanied him to the village, and she faced Drake with quiet dignity. "I am not a pet," she said clearly. "I am a person who has survived things you could not imagine. And I choose to be with Ethan because he is a good man who treats all people with respect. That is more than I can say for you." Drake sneered at her, but several of the other villagers were nodding in agreement with Rasha's words. Public opinion was not entirely against them, Ethan realized. There were people willing to see beyond prejudice, given the chance. They left the village with their supplies and headed home. Rasha was quiet during the walk, and Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders. "Do not let Drake bother you," he said. "He is a bitter man who needs someone to hate to feel important. I know. But it is hard sometimes, being reminded that so many people see me as less than human, as a thing to be despised. You are worth 10 of Samuel Drake, Ethan said fiercely, and anyone with eyes can see that. They continued working the farm as spring arrived. The snow melted, the creek swelled with runoff, and the first green shoots began pushing up through the thawed earth. Ethan and Rasha planted their crops together, working side by side in the fields. They fell into an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's movements and needs without needing to speak. In April, they traveled to the nearest town to file for a marriage license. The clerk was clearly uncomfortable with the request, but the law was clear. Interspecies marriages were legal in the territory, even if they were rare and often frowned upon. The clerk processed their paperwork with obvious reluctance, but he processed it. They set the wedding date for early June, after the spring planting was finished, but before the height of summer's heat. Mrs. Talbot insisted on hosting the ceremony at her farm, and she threw herself into the preparations with enthusiasm. But as the date approached, tensions in the community grew worse. Someone threw a rock through Ethan's window one night with a note tied to it that said, "Monster Lover." Another time, they found one of their fences deliberately cut, allowing Cricket to escape. It took hours to find the horse and repair the damage. Ethan reported the incidents to the territorial magistrate, but the man was sympathetic only in words. "I cannot protect you from people's opinions," he said. "If you insist on this marriage, you will have to deal with the consequences." "The only consequence I care about is spending my life with the woman I love," Ethan replied. "Everything else is just noise." A week before the wedding, Rasha had a visitor. Ethan was in the barn when he heard voices raised in anger. He ran outside to find Rasha facing a tall orc man with skin a darker green than hers and tusks that protruded prominently. The man was dressed in rough traveling clothes and carried a pack that suggested he had journeyed a long way. "You shame yourself," the man was saying in the guttural orc language. Ethan did not speak it, but he could hear the anger in the tone. "You shame all of us by laying with a human." "Who are you to judge me, Kerrigan?" Rasha shot back, also in her native language. "You who cast me out when I needed help. You who stood by and did nothing when the raiders came. I was a child myself, barely old enough to hold a weapon. What could I have done? You could have tried. You could have cared. Instead, you saved yourself and left the rest of us to our fate." The man, Kerrigan, flinched as if she had struck him. "I have regretted that every day since. But this is different. I have traveled 2 months to find you, to bring you back to what remains of our clan. We are rebuilding in the northern hills. You could have a place there with your own people." "These are my people now," Rasha said, gesturing to indicate Ethan and the farm. "This is my home." "With a human, Rasha, be sensible. He will tire of you eventually, they always do, and then where will you be?" Ethan had heard enough. He walked over and stood beside Rasha, not touching her but making his presence known. "I am Ethan Kerrigan," he said clearly, "and Rasha is going to be my wife. I do not know what happened between the two of you in the past, but I know that she has made her choice. You need to respect that." Kerrigan looked between them, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed deeply. "You are really going to do this, marry this human?" "Yes," Rasha said firmly. "I love him and he loves me. That is all that matters, love," Kerrigan said bitterly. "Love is not enough when the world is against you." "But I can see I will not change your mind." He reached into his pack and pulled out a small carved figure, a goat made from some kind of pale wood. "Your mother made this. I found it in the ruins of our old village last year. I thought you might want it." Rasha took the carving with trembling hands. "My mother made this. She was a skilled carver. I remember watching her work on it. She said it was for you for your 5th name day." Kagan's voice was softer now. She loved you very much, Rasha. She would want you to be happy wherever that happiness is found. Thank you, Rasha whispered. Thank you for bringing this to me. Kerrigan nodded. He looked at Ethan for a long moment. You, human. If you hurt her, if you betray her trust, I will find out and I will come back. Understand, understood, Ethan said. But you will be waiting a long time, because I have no intention of hurting her. Kerrigan grunted, apparently satisfied. He shouldered his pack and began walking away, then paused. There is a saying among our people, may your hearth be warm and your table full. I give you that blessing, cousin, even if I do not understand your choice. Then he was gone, disappearing down the road. Rasha stood holding the carved goat, tears streaming down her face. Ethan put his arm around her shoulders and held her while she cried. He called you cousin, Ethan said eventually. Was he family, distant cousin? We played together as children before the raid. I had not thought about him in years, had not known if he survived. Rasha looked at the carving. My mother made this. I have something of hers now, something real. That is a precious gift, Ethan said gently. Yes, and so is the blessing he gave. Among orcs, that is no small thing. It means he accepts our union, even if he does not fully approve. They went inside and Rasha placed the carved goat on the shelf near their bed. It was the first piece of her past she had been able to reclaim, and it meant more to her than Ethan could fully understand. The day of the wedding arrived bright and warm. Mrs. Talbot's farm had been decorated with spring flowers and ribbons, and a small group of guests had gathered. It was not a large wedding, but everyone there was someone who genuinely supported Ethan and Rasha's union. Ethan wore his best clothes, simple but clean and well-fitted. Rasha wore a dress that Mrs. Talbot had helped her make, a beautiful green fabric that complemented her skin tone perfectly. Her black hair was loose for once, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. She looked beautiful and nervous and radiantly happy. The ceremony was conducted by a traveling minister who had no prejudice against interspecies marriages. He spoke about love and commitment, about the courage it took to build a life together in the face of adversity, about the sacred nature of vows freely given. When it came time for the vows themselves, Ethan took Rasha's hands in his. I promise to honor you as my equal, he said. To support your dreams and stand by you in difficult times. To love you not despite who you are, but because of who you are. You have shown me what true strength and courage look like, and I am grateful every day that you chose to build a life with me. Rasha's voice shook when she spoke her own vows. I promise to trust you with my heart, even though trust is hard for me. To work beside you and build a future with you. To be honest with you always. You gave me back my humanity when I thought it was lost forever. You taught me that I was worthy of love and respect. I will spend the rest of my life showing you that your faith in me was not misplaced. They exchanged simple rings, bands of silver that Ethan had commissioned from a smith in town. When the minister pronounced them married, Ethan kissed his wife gently, sweetly, while their small gathering of guests cheered and applauded. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. There was food and music, and people danced on Mrs. Talbot's front lawn as the sun set behind the mountains. Ethan danced with Rasha, holding her close and marveling at how his life had changed since that first evening when he asked her why she ate standing up. Are you happy? He asked her as they swayed together. Happier than I ever thought possible, she replied. I have a home, I have you. I have a future to look forward to instead of just an endless present to endure. Yes, Ethan, I am happy. They stayed at Mrs. Talbot's that night in the same guest room where they had stayed during the house repairs, but everything felt different now. They were married, bound together legally and spiritually, and the weight of that commitment was both terrifying and wonderful. "I am nervous," Rasha admitted as they prepared for bed. "Is that silly? We have lived together for months now. It is not silly. Everything changed today. We made promises to each other in front of witnesses. That means something." Ethan took her hands. "But nothing has to happen tonight that you are not ready for. There is no rush. We have the rest of our lives." "I know, and I appreciate that. But I am ready, Ethan. I want this. I want you. I am just nervous because it is all so new." They took their time that night, exploring this new dimension of their relationship with tenderness and care. Ethan was patient and attentive, making sure Rasha felt safe and cherished. And when she finally fell asleep in his arms, her head on his chest and her breathing slow, and even, he felt a contentment deeper than anything he had ever experienced. They returned to their farm the next morning, to their life together. Nothing had fundamentally changed, and yet everything had. They were partners now in the fullest sense, building a future together one day at a time. The hostility from some community members continued, but it became easier to bear. Samuel Drake made a few more attempts at harassment, but after Ethan reported him to the magistrate for the third time and threatened legal action, Drake backed off. Other skeptics gradually warmed as they saw that Ethan and Rasha's marriage was not some passing fancy, but a genuine partnership built on love and mutual respect. In July, they finally got those goats Ethan had mentioned, purchasing a small herd from a farmer 2 territories over. Rasha threw herself into caring for them, and her joy at working with the animals was beautiful to see. She sang to them in her native language, old songs she remembered from her childhood, and the goats thrived under her care. One evening in August, as they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Rasha asked, "Do you ever regret it, marrying me, dealing with all the complications it has brought?" "Never," Ethan said immediately. "Not for a single second." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rasha Kerrigan." She smiled at the sound of her new name. "I like being a Kerrigan. It makes me feel like I truly belong somewhere." "You do belong. You belong here with me for as long as you want to stay." "Forever then," she said. "I choose forever." As autumn arrived, bringing the harvest season with it, Ethan and Rasha worked their fields together with the easy coordination of a team that knew each other perfectly. Their wheat yield was the best Ethan had ever achieved, and the vegetables from their expanded garden were abundant and healthy. They preserved what they could for winter and sold the rest at the village market, building up their savings for the future. One night in September, Rasha made an announcement. "I want to start a tradition," she said as they sat at dinner, at the table both of them sitting like equals, like partners. "Every year on the anniversary of the day we met, I want to have a special meal, and I want to stand up to eat it." Ethan looked at her in surprise. "Why would you want to stand?" "To remember," she said simply. "To remember where I came from and how far I have traveled, not because I am forced to stand, but because I choose to, as a reminder that freedom is precious and should never be taken for granted." "That is a beautiful idea," Ethan said. "We will do that. Every year we will stand together and remember." They talked about other traditions they might create, ways of blending their different backgrounds into something new and uniquely theirs. Rasha wanted to observe some of the orc festivals she remembered from her childhood, celebrations of the seasons and the land. Ethan shared human traditions with her, and together they picked and chose what felt right for them. In October, Mrs. Talbot threw a harvest celebration and invited half the territory. It was her way of forcing the community to accept Ethan and Rasha's marriage, making it impossible for people to pretend they did not exist. Most people came, if only out of respect for Mrs. Talbot, and the evening ended up being surprisingly pleasant. Ethan watched Rasha talking and laughing with some of the village women, watched her slowly being accepted as part of the community, and felt proud and grateful. Winter came again, but this time they were prepared. The chimney was new and solid, the house was well stocked with food and firewood, and they had each other. When snow fell and the world turned white and quiet, Ethan and Rasha stayed warm inside, reading by the fire and planning for the spring. One evening in January, almost exactly a year after the night the chimney had collapsed, Rasha had news. "I am pregnant," she said quietly. Ethan dropped the book he was holding. "What? Are you sure?" "I am sure. Orc women know these things early. We are very attuned to our bodies." She looked nervous. "Are you happy? I know we have not talked about children much." "Happy." Ethan crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "Rasha, I am thrilled. Terrified, but thrilled. We are going to be parents." "Half-orc children are rare," Rasha warned. "The pregnancy can be difficult. And the child will face challenges we cannot fully protect them from. They will not fit completely in either world, human or orc. Then we will teach them to make their own world," Ethan said firmly. "We will give them so much love and support that the prejudice of others will not matter. And they will grow up knowing that they are wanted and valued exactly as they are." Rasha's eyes filled with tears. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "I don't. I just speak the truth as I see it. They spent that winter preparing for the baby. Ethan built a cradle from oak wood, carving protective symbols into the headboard. Rasha made blankets and tiny clothes, her strong hands surprisingly delicate with needle and thread. Mrs. Talbot provided endless advice and hand-me-down baby items, delighted at the prospect of a little one to spoil. The pregnancy was difficult as Rasha had warned. She was often sick in the early months, and as the baby grew, the physical toll on her body was significant. But she bore it all with characteristic determination, and Ethan supported her every step of the way. Their daughter was born on a warm day in late August, screaming her arrival to the world with impressive lung power. She had Rasha's green skin, though a lighter shade, and Ethan's brown eyes. Her ears were pointed like her mother's, and she had the tiniest nubs where tusks would eventually grow. She was perfect. "What should we name her?" Ethan asked, holding his daughter with a mixture of awe and terror. She was so small, so fragile-looking. "I was thinking Alina," Rasha said softly. "It means light, because she is the light of our future." "Alina Kerrigan," Ethan said, testing the name. "It is perfect. She is perfect." Raising a half-orc child in a human community was not easy. There were stares and whispers whenever they brought Alina to the village. Some people refused to interact with them at all, but there were also people like Mrs. Talbot, who simply adored Alina, who saw her as a child rather than as something strange or wrong. Alina grew quickly, as orc children do. By her first birthday she was walking and beginning to talk, mixing words from both human and orc languages in ways that made Ethan and Rasha laugh. She was strong and curious and fearless, constantly getting into everything and keeping her parents on their toes. One evening when Alina was 2 years old, Ethan came in from the fields to find Rasha sitting at the dinner table with their daughter on her lap. They were eating together, both of them sitting, and Rasha was teaching Alina how to use a spoon properly. "When I grow up, will I have to stand?" Alina asked in her high, clear voice. "No, baby," Rasha said gently. "You will always get to sit. You are free, you have always been free." "But you had to stand once, right? When you were a slave." Rasha's eyes met Ethan's across the room. They had told Alina age-appropriate versions of their story, wanting her to understand her mother's past without burdening her with the full horror of it. "Yes, I had to stand," Rasha confirmed. But that was a long time ago, before I met your father, before I learned that I deserved better. Now I sit because I choose to sit. That is the difference." "I am glad you sit now, Mama," Alina said seriously. "It would be sad if you had to stand all the time." After Alina was in bed, Ethan found Rasha standing on the porch, looking out at the darkening fields. He joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. "Thinking about the past?" he asked. "Thinking about how far I have come," she corrected. "When I first arrived here, I thought my life was over. I thought I would work until I dropped dead, that I would never know joy or freedom or love. And now look at me. I have a husband who adores me. I have a beautiful daughter. I have a home and land and a future. It is almost too much to believe sometimes." "Believe it," Ethan said, kissing her temple. "You built this life through your own strength and courage. Yes, I helped, but you did the real work of healing and growing and choosing hope over despair." "We built it together," Rasha said firmly. "That is the truth. Neither of us could have done this alone." Years passed. Alina grew into a bright, determined child who inherited her mother's strength and her father's empathy. She had friends in the village, children who did not care that she looked different as long as she shared her toys and played fair. The community slowly changed too, becoming more accepting as people got used to seeing an interspecies family living peacefully among them. Ethan and Rasha expanded their farm, adding more land and more animals. They hired workers during busy seasons, and they made sure to pay fair wages and treat everyone with respect. Their farm became known as a place where anyone could find honest work and decent treatment, regardless of their species or background. On the anniversary of the day they met, every year without fail, Ethan and Rasha would stand together to eat their evening meal. Alina would stand with them, part of the tradition even though she did not fully understand it yet. Someday they would tell her the full story, about her mother's courage and the terrible things she had survived. But for now, it was enough that she knew this was important, that she honored it by participating. Samuel Drake eventually moved away, unable to stand living near a successful interspecies family that challenged everything he believed. A few other die-hard prejudice people left too. But most stayed, and most gradually came to accept that love was love regardless of what species were involved. When Alina was 5, Rasha's cousin Kerrigan visited again. He brought news from the north, where the orc clans were continuing to rebuild and thrive. He also brought a gift, a young female goat descended from the herds Rasha's mother had once kept. "Her name is Bella," Kerrigan said, handing the lead rope to Alina. "She is for you, little cousin. Your grandmother would have wanted you to have her." Alina was thrilled with her goat, and she immediately appointed herself Bella's primary caretaker. Kerrigan stayed for dinner that night, sitting at the table with the family and sharing stories of the Northern Territories. He and Rasha had made their peace years ago, and now they talked as the friends they had been as children, before tragedy had separated them. Before he left, Kerrigan pulled Ethan aside. "I was wrong about you," he said bluntly. "Wrong to think a human could not truly love an orc woman. Wrong to think your marriage would not last. You have built something good here, something worth protecting. I am glad Rasha found you." "I am glad she found me too," Ethan said. "She saved me as much as I saved her, maybe more." "That is how the best partnerships work," Kerrigan said. "Take care of her, human, and take care of that fierce little daughter of yours. She's going to change the world someday." More years passed, each one adding new layers to the life Ethan and Rasha had built. They faced challenges, of course, times when money was tight or illness struck or conflicts arose. But they faced everything together, partners in the fullest sense of the word. Alina grew into a teenager, tall and strong like her mother, but with her father's thoughtful nature. She had decided she wanted to be a teacher, wanting to help create a world where children of all species could learn together without prejudice. Ethan and Rasha supported her dream, setting aside money for her education and encouraging her studies. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan and Rasha took a rare evening to themselves. Alina was staying with Mrs. Talbot, who was now in her 70s but still spry and always happy to spend time with her honorary granddaughter. The farm was running smoothly. The weather was perfect. They sat on their porch as the sun set, watching the light fade from gold to orange to purple. Rasha's head was on Ethan's shoulder, his arm around her waist. They had sat like this countless times over the years, but it never got old. "You remember the first time I ate sitting down in your house?" Rasha asked. "How terrified I was, I remember. You looked like you thought the chair might explode. It felt like it might, like I was breaking some fundamental rule of the universe." She was quiet for a moment. "I am so glad you pushed me. I am so glad you refused to accept my status as a slave even after everyone else had." "I just treated you the way you deserve to be treated," Ethan said. "The way everyone deserves to be treated. You changed my life, Ethan Kerrigan. You gave me back my humanity, and then you gave me a reason to cherish it. I will never be able to repay that debt." "There is no debt," Ethan said firmly. "We chose each other. We built this life together, and I am grateful every single day that you walked into my life and decided to stay." Rasha shifted so she could look at him directly. Her amber eyes were bright in the fading light, full of love and contentment. "If I could go back and talk to the girl I was 10 years ago, the one eating standing up because she thought she did not deserve better, do you know what I would tell her?" "What?" "I would tell her to hold on. To survive just a little bit longer, because something wonderful is waiting for her, someone who will see her as she truly is and love her for it. I would tell her that her story does not end in slavery and pain. It ends in freedom and joy and a love that will sustain her through anything." Ethan kissed her gently. "And I would tell the man I was, the lonely farmer who thought he would spend his life alone, that he should prepare for his world to be turned upside down in the best possible way. That he is about to meet someone who will challenge him and inspire him and make him happier than he ever thought possible." They sat together as night fell. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ruins of a painful past. Inside their house, the table was set for tomorrow's breakfast, 3 chairs pulled up for a family that chose to sit together. In the barn, their animals were settling in for the night, well fed and well cared for. In the fields, their crops were growing strong, tended by hands that knew both hardship and hope. And on a shelf in their bedroom, a carved wooden goat stood watch, a reminder of where they had come from and how far they had traveled. A reminder that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply choosing to sit down when the world tells you that you must stand. A reminder that freedom is not just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice, of dignity, of love freely given and received. Rasha had been a slave who ate standing up because she was told slaves did not sit. Now she was a free woman, a wife, a mother, a landowner, a full person living a full life. And every time she sat down at the table with her family, every time she made that simple choice, it was a quiet victory. A reminder that she had survived, that she had overcome, that she had found her way home. And Ethan, the man who had first noticed her standing alone and had asked a simple question that changed both their lives, sat beside her as he always would. Partners in everything, facing whatever the future held together. Their story had started with a question about sitting and standing, but it had become something much larger, much more profound. It had become a story about seeing each other truly, about choosing love over fear, about building a life that honored both the past and the future. As the stars came out above their farm, painting the sky with light, Ethan and Rasha went inside. They checked on the house, banked the fire, prepared for tomorrow. And then they went to bed together, holding each other in the darkness, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. They had found home. The years continued to unfold. Alina graduated from her studies and returned to the territory to open the first integrated school, where human and orc children learned side by side. She married a kind young man, a human from the eastern provinces who loved her fiercely and without reservation. They gave Ethan and Rasha grandchildren, beautiful little ones with varied features who carried the best of all their heritages. Ethan and Rasha grew old together. Their bodies aged and slowed, but their love never diminished. They still sat together at meals, still marked the anniversary of their meeting with their standing tradition, still worked the farm together though they hired more help as the years wore on. On a warm spring evening when they were both in their 60s, they sat on their porch and watched their grandchildren play in the yard. The children were chasing each other, shrieking with laughter, completely unconscious of how revolutionary their very existence was. To them, having mixed heritage was simply normal. They had never known a world where love was limited by species. "We did it," Rasha said quietly. "We helped change things. Not completely, but enough that our grandchildren can grow up without the same fear and hatred we faced." "You did it," Ethan corrected. "Your courage, your willingness to trust and to build a life here, that is what changed minds. I just gave you a place to stand." "We did it together," Rasha said, as she always did when Ethan tried to give her all the credit. "Everything we have accomplished, we did together." They had been married for 35 years. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative. They had faced prejudice and hardship and loss. But they had also known joy and love, and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful with their own hands and hearts. "Do you ever think about the girl you were?" Ethan asked. "The one who ate standing up?" "Sometimes," Rasha admitted. "I think about her and I wish I could tell her that she is stronger than she knows, that she will survive, that she will not just survive but thrive, that she will find love and family and purpose, that her story is not over, it is just beginning." "I think she would be proud of you," Ethan said. "Of everything you have become." "I think she would be amazed," Rasha said with a smile, "and grateful, so very grateful." As the sun set and the children were called in for dinner, Ethan and Rasha went inside together. They moved slowly now, their bodies bearing the weight of decades of hard work and life lived fully. But they moved together, always together. At the dinner table, surrounded by family, they sat side by side. And in that simple act of sitting, of taking their place at the table as equals and partners, they celebrated everything they had built, every choice they had made, every challenge they had overcome, because in the end, that was what it came down to. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, though those had their place, but the daily choice to see each other, to honor each other, to build a life based on love and respect and mutual support. Rasha had learned to sit at the table. But more importantly, she had learned to claim her place in the world, to stand up for herself and her family, to refuse to accept anything less than full humanity and dignity. And Ethan had learned that love was not about saving someone but about walking beside them. About creating a space where they could save themselves, about being a partner in the truest sense of the word. Together they had built something beautiful, a family, a home, a life. And though the journey had been hard, neither of them would have changed a single step of it. Because every step, every choice, every challenge had led them exactly where they needed to be, together, at home, at peace. Their story had started with a simple observation and a simple question. It had grown into something neither of them could have imagined in those early days. And it had ended, not with sadness or regret, but with fulfillment and joy and the knowledge that they had lived well and loved well. Years later, when their time on earth was done, and they had passed into whatever came next, their descendants would tell their story. They would talk about the brave orc woman and the kind human man who had chosen love over prejudice, who had built a family that bridged two worlds, who had showed everyone around them that the content of a person's character mattered far more than the color of their skin or the shape of their ears. And at the heart of that story, people would always remember one thing. She had eaten standing up because slaves did not sit. But she had learned to sit because she was not a slave. She was a person. A whole, complete, valuable person deserving of dignity and love. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. That was what Ethan and Rasha had given to the world, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.